All right, and good afternoon, everyone. Out in the world of internet, it's Maria Daniels here with Successfully Chaotic, and I have Tammi Schneider here with me. We were a couple minutes late because we were chatting it up in the backstage before we went live. We were talking all about the world of autism, and I know on the show you've probably heard me talk a lot about that just because that's our life, that's our world. And I only have one of my children out of my seven that is autistic, but that becomes everybody's world. And that's what a lot of people don't realize is when you have, any type of special needs, but in my case, my experience is, having an autistic child that really affects everybody's life. And we were kind of talking a little bit about just as a mom, I was telling my experience, but that now I'm homeschooling again. And I know a lot of you all already know that homeschooling again. And I jokingly say homeschooling against my will now, which is not meant to be an awful thing. But I know I've had a couple of people go, against your will, that makes it sound like you don't want to be around your kids. I'm like, well, honestly, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I don't want to be around my kids. So, but I think that's part of it, just mothering in general. I mean, even my kids that are not on the spectrum, I love them with all my heart, but sometimes I want to love them from afar. I want them to go somewhere else. And I think that's kind of part of parenting is you do have both sides of that, right? So Tammi, I want you to jump in though and kind of introduce yourself a little bit and talk about a little bit of what you do. And then we can continue our conversation, right?
Sure, sure. So I guess we were talking about just the fact that homeschooling, and I said, I don't know if I could have homeschooled. So my son is just turned 26 yesterday, which is crazy to believe that I'm the parent of somebody that old. Um, but when he was little, there was the point in time where I sent him to school because I don't know is where it was not conducive for our relationship. I couldn't be the parent and the teacher. It just wouldn't have worked in our life. And so my hope and what I'm trying to do here is to help parents understand that there is a lot of chaos that goes into learning what it is to communicate with our child when they're on the spectrum. Just like every other kid, they're all different, but there is kind of a pattern to autism. And what we need to do is recognize that pattern and then develop those skills for communicating with them in an effective way. And what I try to do is help the parents recognize that you really do know how it's working. I'm just here to help facilitate those thoughts. And then let's put those thoughts on paper and give a detailed explanation of what those communication tools are for the teachers who are in our children's lives, because they need to know how to best do that so that there's less chaos in the classroom. And then that helps us in return, because if there's less chaos in the classroom, then there's less meltdowns at home later that evening because they've had a stressful day.
Absolutely. I like the way you explain that because the way that I usually explain autism to somebody, and I have no formal education on autism. I just have boots on the ground.
Yes. You
learn. So I know I have people go, well, did you guys go? Oh, I did not. But Kate is my fifth child. And typically by the time you have that many kids, you're like, Psh, I got this. I know how to do this parenting thing, right? And I didn't. It was like a whole nother world that I figured out how much I actually did not know. And, the best way that I was kind of, I guess, taught how to communicate with him early on, because he was not really verbal at the very beginning. He would say like a word maybe or two at the very beginning, but that was about it. And was just the fact that I had somebody say to me, and it made the most sense out of everything. And I've, expanded upon that when I talked to other people, but that they spoke a different language. So they literally spoke the language of autism. And that clicked in my own mind, because it's like, okay, so the way that I explain it to people is that, my son will always speak the language of autism naturally. He's learned how to speak a lot of our English words and a lot of the, I guess, atypical way that we communicate on things, but he didn't understand a lot of that early on. He didn't understand, when we wanted something, like didn't understand our facial, cues that a lot of kids pick up easily. It was extremely hard for him. And so, I think if people kind of look at it kind of like that made it easier for me. And you may have a better way of explaining it, but for me, that made so much sense because it's just like any other language barrier to me.
Right. I totally agree with that. I heard a great analogy just yesterday, actually, and it was the difference between an Apple operating system and a Windows operating system. And when the two were very far apart, we had to learn one or the other. And we had to try, if you were working with somebody who was doing a Mac, then you had to learn their language. Now, as our children have grown up, they're learning how to speak both of those, and we're learning how to speak both of those.
That's great. I actually might use that as well. That's amazing because it's just, I think it's trying to explain to people that this hasn't been part of their life in a way that kind of clicks with them. And I love that. And, I know another thing that I've noticed is that a lot of times people will think that, once they've, hit this milestone or that milestone, because, people on the spectrum still hit milestones. They just hit them at different timelines.
Right.
And, they think once they've kind of mastered that's it. They're not going to revert at all. And that's one of the things that I had to kind of learn the hard way. It's like, okay, yes, we've got to this point that we're able to do this now. Yay, we're able to do this. But if he's severely stressed out or anything's going on, he reverts back. Mm-hmm. He wants to not speak. He wants to grunt and point with his elbow. He wants to do all these things that he did before that, I am like, we're past this. I've had to learn on my own that they tend to revert just again, like a language barrier. And I think that's why I seen something one time. I don't even remember what it was. I think it was it was something that before I stopped watching the news because it's not good for me. That's a whole other story for another day. But
yeah,
there was a lady that she spoke fluid English, but she had been raised speaking Spanish, and she was so traumatized that she was just speaking Spanish, and they couldn't communicate with her, even though she spoke fluid English, because during those moments of trauma, we tend to revert back to what's natural to us, which made sense again with kids with autism. Their natural language is always going to be autism, whether they're 10 or 40, their natural language is always going to be autism. So depending on the level of trauma, it made sense that they would revert during those times.
Right.
Has that been your experience?
It has. And I noticed that I think the way that I learned that mostly was when meltdowns would happen, and they go into what everybody else thinks is a tantrum, but it's really an overdone moment where they are so stressed, and you have to figure out, well, what was that trigger and how do we get there? Because we have to get through this moment because they just can't plain cope. It's not a tantrum. It's just a lack of being able to cope. And I don't know how many times I'd get calls from the teachers, like, he's having a meltdown. I'm like, well, okay, what's gone on in the day before this? What leads up to this? Like, what it could be the stressor? What's the kickoff to make this have happened? And that's just what we have to learn.
So you said your son is 26 now.
Mm-hmm.
We're just now getting into the older years, and like I said, he's number 5. So my oldest is 22. So I've been in the teens and I've been in the early 20s, but not with autism. This is one of those things. It's like that, and I think that's kind of been obviously the world of Cade is learning that it's like, okay, well, I think I have this down, but really, let's see over here what kind of surprises we have. So he'll be 13 in May, and I'm sitting there thinking, teenage years were not really a blast with my atypical kids. I'm not going to lie. So I'm kind of wondering what that is going to look like with hormones and everything on top of autism. So
I totally get where you're coming from on that one. That was an interesting thing to navigate, but I actually kind of, as bad as it seems, is I am thankful that I had boys, because it wasn't near as emotional as I think it was that I was as a teenager. Yeah. And, some of those things were easy to navigate. Some of those things were not even part of even worrying about. But I am in the same boat or same situation that I do now that I did then, is that, the world is very black and white, and we deal with the situation right now as it is, not the what ifs.
So do you have any other children
I
or
do. I have one other boy. He's 22.
okay, because it sounded like, as you said, boys. I was like, oh, she's got more children. So,
Yeah.
so that makes me want to ask you a question. I know with my children, obviously, it's affected their lives in different ways. Like with my older children, there was a period of time where we just didn't go anywhere. We went no places because everything was overstimulating, which I've noticed with the two oldest ones. It's not been as big of a deal with them, but I have two other ones that are closer to Cade's age, and there's still a little tension between them. It's like they're accepting, they're understanding on some level, but there's still this almost like, I guess, jealousy or resentment a little bit, and it's just kind of like underlying. Was there any type of? They're probably gonna kill me if they watch this, but but it's just, this is life, and I understand it. Like all of a sudden, their life was one way, and then all of a sudden it was flipped a different way because of this one person, and it took them a while to even kind of understand why that was, because obviously me and my husband as adults, we were trying to understand it too, so they definitely didn't get it. So was there any, like, I guess, type of resentment between your two children? Because I wonder if that's because I've talked to a couple other autism moms, because we become a big club, how that goes, and it seems like that's been the thing too. Like they're kind of navigating where I was then, trying to explain to their other children that no, it's not all about so and so. This is just something we have to do as a family type of thing, because they don't really understand that.
Right. I was fortunate that I was turned on to the books, How to Talk So Your Kids Will Listen and Listen So Your Kids Will Talk. Their second book is called Siblings Without Rivalry. And it talks very specifically about making sure that each child is heard. Just because one son gets it doesn't mean the second one gets it, or vice versa. So I was very careful once that started to kind of appear where he wanted to know. I guess I was fortunate that he was the second, so he didn't know any different. But I do know that I specifically remember him being very stressed about what was going to happen to his brother and to him.
Yeah.
And as soon as I could assure him that we'd put, financial resources in a plan, we'd made a plan so that his brother isn't going to always be his responsibility. And then they could finally have that relationship that came out of being brothers rather than out of responsibility. So that was one of the things I did. And I don't even know where I even thought of that, but as soon as I said it, it was a world of difference.
That's awesome. And yeah, I didn't do the math that he would be the younger one. My younger kids, because there is two younger than him, it's been different because that's all they've ever known.
Yeah.
That it's the ones a couple of years, above him. That was kind of like me. But it's funny. My Cade and Cole, I was just going to say their names. I say their names on here all the time. They are 3.5, almost 4 years apart. And Cole has always been more like the older brother, even though he's the younger brother by many, many years, because that's all he's ever known, and even to the point of sometimes being the one that steps in to explain to Cade, what's going on. And that's been kind of a cool thing to see. Now they still fight. They are to the point now they fight like cats and dogs too, which is also kind of good to see, because as when you have special needs kids, any of these quote unquote normal things they go on, you're like, oh, okay, we never thought we'd be here, right? We never thought we'd understand arguing even, so even though you're like, stop, you're like inside like, oh yeah, okay, we've at least hit that, we understand, that he's getting on my nerves, I understand that, type of thing. So, I mean, and I like that you mentioned financial resources, because that's another thing. Like, of course, all parents think about what, the what ifs and all that kind of stuff, but it's more what ifs when you have a special needs kid, because, you have to think about who is going to take care of them. It's not, there's no point in time where you can, depending on the kid and the severity, of course, but there's no point in time with a lot of these children that you could be like, okay, well, they're on their own, right? And a lot of people don't think about that. And I love that you mentioned that. Was there a specific, you mentioned a couple of books here that I actually am going to look up and read, and I'll make sure that anybody that's watching or listening, I'll put some links in there to that. And I know I want to talk about your book too, which we'll get to that in a minute, but is there any books that you recommend as far as financial guidance for special needs, or is it something you just came up with?
We sat down to make a will, and she said, you need to have a special needs trust.
Okay.
And I had to explore what I had people say, a special needs trust. So I don't know anything more than,
and that's fine.
That I needed to have this. And
so talk to your financial advisor is what we're saying.
I would. And talk to them about the trust, because my understanding is that, it's written into your will, and then the trust is created upon your death. It's not a physical thing until then. That's what I understand about it.
Okay.
Other than that.
No, and I think it's good to even know that exists, that even to go into your financial advisor and say, hey, I was listening to somebody, they talked about some type of special needs trust. Can you explain more about that? I think that's good information, because it has me questioning too. I know we've done some stuff. I don't know that world either. So I'm even going to ask my financial advisor about that.
Yeah.
So I think that's great advice.
Yes.
So, okay, let's pivot a little bit to your book. So you are an author.
Mm-hmm.
So can you tell us a little bit about your book?
So the first one that I've participated in was kind of an anthology. So it was a lot of different women who are talking about what it means to live and get through chaos. So how to be resilient. And as you and I know, that chaos, that first part of learning what it's all about, to being able to say, okay, I got this, I can do this. There's a whole lot of things and emotions that go on with that. And so we're all just kind of talking about what was our story and what did we do to get through that. What's that memory you're trying to, that I guess, other than saying it's a gift, you're trying to give somebody a gift of, hope, and that you can be resilient and you can get through this and get on the other side of it. So that's, that was, it's a phenomenal book just to read all of the different stories.
And what's the title of that book?
That one is called Thriving Beyond Crisis, Conversations with Resilient Entrepreneurs.
And I think that's great. I think those are important things to talk about, because we even kind of a little bit talked about this before we went live, and we were talking about it just in the world of autism, that we hear the bright, shiny, glittery sides of autism and special needs kids and how wonderful they are. And they are. But there's also the sides where it's so hard and you're not sure if you can do this, and you're frustrated and you're sad and all the emotions. And I think it's the same thing with any type of, you said crisis, I guess crisis or traumatic experience or just changes or anything like that. We get these emotions obviously attached to that. And I think it's important for us to talk about good emotions, because that does give us hope, but being able to take people through the entire story of how you felt when you didn't feel okay, and that now you feel okay, like you mentioned, it gives people hope, and gives people the will to kind of move past that moment, because we all have them. And a lot of times, I think a lot of us that, maybe haven't been through tons and tons of traumatic experience, the first time that we go through anything that's traumatic, we're like, oh, this is it, I'm done for. So we need somebody to say, no, you've got this. This is hard now, but it's going to get better and better and better. And I love that you did that. And you said books. So what's the title of your other book? How many books have you written at this point?
So I have 4 that are available. So the Thriving Through Crisis is my most recent. The one just prior to that is Understanding Sensory Overload. So what we've determined is that there is this hierarchy of needs for every person. Every person needs to know that they're safe and they have shelter and they have food before they, when you're scrambling for those things, you can't think about anything else. Well, the same is true for these kids, except that theirs is more based around their sensory. You have to be able to get those things out of the way before you can get them to the next level. So you can't expect a higher functioning or executive functioning out of anybody, specifically an autistic, without developing and fulfilling those basic needs. So I created this. We talk about what's the hierarchy, what are those different levels that you need to help them achieve in order to have that higher executive functioning.
That's awesome. I would love to check that book out as well, because I think that's important for just understanding it to the level of being able to explain it to somebody else. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like that's, you mentioned that you're an autism advocate. I think all of us parents obviously are advocates for our own kids. So I feel like most of my life is just trying to explain why Kate does whatever, So being
Exactly.
able to have those, you said you created that, is there like a PDF that goes with it, or is it just a graphic, or?
No, it's a PDF. It's a PDF book. So it's an ebook
Okay, awesome.
that has some graphics and then just explanations of each of those levels that
I
I
think that's a
can.
great tool.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I mean, if anybody right now is listening or watching that, is involved with autism, maybe you're a teacher or maybe you have an autistic member of your family, I think a tool like this is, a great way to, it gives a visual, right? It gives a
Right.
visual way to be able to explain to people, because it's hard to navigate that world, as a parent, and you're in it every single day. And I've even thought about this, about how much my son has taught me just about the entire special needs world. I always felt like I was a pretty accepting person. I did, and I had a little bit of experience with special needs. It was Down syndrome, but one of the things that I learned really quick is, it was a little bit different for my son, because my son doesn't have, quote unquote, a look, right, with my family member with Down syndrome. He could be having a hard time, and somebody could look at him physically and say, oh, he's having a hard time because he has Down syndrome. They had a little
Mhm.
bit more, sympathy and empathy. My son looked like every other child, except for he wasn't. And so
Mhm.
I would get rude comments and, from well-meaning people about how I should, quote unquote, discipline more, and all the things that people say when they're trying to help, but really are just making
Mhm.
you feel terrible. And, there was, for a long time, I, was having a hard time even navigating that world myself. So being able to explain it to somebody else was hard. So, I mean, tools like this, I think, are so important, to be able to have access to when you're trying to figure out, navigate. So I love that. I'll make sure that the link for that book is also in the show notes. And what was the other books that you have? Now I'm
The other
interested.
ones,
I'm like making a list.
the other ones are very simple. It's just understanding the basics, the gifts of autism, and understanding just what that means to be autistic. Um, I can't even remember the fourth title. The only other one I can remember is called The Gifts of Autism.
That's all right. I
And
put you
I'm
on the spot.
totally blanking on the other
That's okay.
ones.
Well, we'll get them from you. We'll make sure that they're in the show notes. So, I mean, anyway, I think that's great. And it is a gift. I mean, again, there's both sides. There's a yin and yang of everything. But all in all, the way that my son sees the world is amazing. It's just being able to calm us all down long enough to actually take a breath and realize that, because there's some of the time that it's hard to do that when you're in the middle of all of it.
Mhm.
But the way that they see the world is a gift. There are gifts to it, and I think that's part of any parenting experience anyway, or just life in general, right? It's there's good parts, there's highs and lows of everything, and I love that you called it a gift. That's great.
Thank you. Well, I really do think in most respects, it's a gift. I see my son, people tend to tag autistics as uncaring. And specifically my son, I think he's almost more caring. It just is sometimes they're a little bit more awkward. And like a comedian said, she just didn't tell her face that
Yeah.
she's concerned. So they don't always know how to express it, but they're very loving. He's very loving. I get a hug and a kiss every day, and he tells me he loves me, and he asks me how my day was and how did I sleep. I mean, they're the same questions, but he's very vested. And these kids are, if you give them a chance. They may have to
Right.
tell you about everything that is their current obsession too, but
Oh yeah.
you do get some really good stuff
Oh
there.
yeah. I know way more about Minecraft than I ever cared to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Where he showed me every single block of everything, and I'm like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's like, oh,
yeah. Well,
yeah, there's a lot.
mine's decided that it in his one of his is Star Wars, and we
Oh
were
yeah.
talking about Mandalorian and the timeline of it, and I was asking questions. He said, this is like trying to teach trig to a toddler."
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that
Like,
funny?
okay, I'm not gonna get it. We're just gonna have to end it there.
It's funny because I don't know what your experience was when your son was diagnosed, but my son was not diagnosed until he was 4.5. But and one of the reasons why they wasn't going with autism at first is because he would hug me.
Mm-hmm.
And that baffled me. I mean, again, I was an advocate even then saying, okay, well, I don't understand why him hugging. Well, these are kind of the parameters. With autism, they're not, like you just mentioned, affectionate, which I know now is completely ridiculous. But he would hug me. You know, he would hug me. And so he didn't meet the criteria because of that for the longest time. And, you know, my son is very loving. Now, like you said, there are sometimes you can tell if he's had a rough day, he sucks inside of himself a little more,
Right.
Depending on how the day goes. And I usually can tell, actually, by the way he's acting, you know, something's going on. And then we get to play detective to figure out what it is because, you know, they don't just come out and say what it is, you know, that whole game. But, you know, it's funny being brought into that world. And another thing I remember, a doctor, finally he had got diagnosed and we were seeing this one doctor and I don't know. I crack jokes. I'm kind of sarcastic. Our families love language of sarcasm. And I remember this doctor kind of was rude with me. And he said, you know, you need to be a little more, I don't remember the word he used, but pretty much don't be sarcastic because this child's never going to understand sarcasm. And I was like, well, he's completely screwed because even when I'm not thinking about it, we're just sarcastic. And, you know, it's just my entire family. This is how I was raised. It's like, that is my language. And it's funny now. I said this other to my husband. My husband and I was sitting there and my son said something super sarcastic. I'm like, I just want to record him and just send this to that doctor. I was like, because he didn't know what he was talking about. He gets sarcasm. Now, when he was little, he didn't. I'd say something and he'd, you know, wide eye me and I'd be like, it's all right. This is sarcasm. I just explained to him what sarcasm was. And when I defined it, he understood it. And I think they don't give these kids enough credit. You know, they might not automatically know what it is, but, you know, they can learn.
Oh yeah, mine can talk smack with the best of them.
Yeah,
now I mean, he's learned.
Yeah, it's funny. It is. So let's talk about. So when you say you're an autism advocate and that you work with other families, can you explain what that looks like? Because I do get a lot of listeners that are, you know, involved in the autism world, and you know they may be interested in kind of what that means.
So what my goal really is to help parents kind of be that accountability factor for developing what are those communication tools that your child's teacher is going to need. And I think a lot of people right now with COVID, you know, you're in and out of the school and there's a lot of stuff going on. So we need to get this dialed in now while you've had a ton of experience with them at home to know how did it work here and how will that work in the classroom. And what we do is it's really a lot about brainstorming. What do you know? Here's the framework of what the communication skills are, because we know there are certain criteria for communication. So let's talk about each of those components. And then what do you know about your son or daughter in those components? And then let's get that into a document that we can then turn around and be able to advocate for what they need in the classroom. And awesome. I've created a course that is both short, you know, easy bite-sized videos, as well as a weekly, you know, live Q&A where we can get together and we can brainstorm together in a live format. Say, well, have you thought about this? Or can you say this? I've facilitated the How to Talk So Kids Will Listen parenting classes. So we talk a lot about communication. How do we communicate that effectively so that they understand, your child understands, as well as how the teacher or another person can understand that? That's kind of where my specialty really lies. Is let's talk about what are those words we use.
That's awesome. I wish I had met you like so many years ago. You would have made my life so much easier. It's like, because you don't feel like you have anywhere to turn. And, you know, I always like to paint both sides of, you know, the picture. It's, you know, my son's wonderful and amazing and all the things, but, you know, especially at the very beginning of the diagnosis, well, in my case, I was not sleeping because my son needed like zero sleep. And, you know, I was exhausted and I was scared and, confused and trying to learn all the things. And, you lose friends, family kind of isolates. And it's not because they don't love you, it's because they don't know what to do and how to react. So it's like, not only are you going through all this stuff, and most of the time you have other responsibilities as well, but you lose your support system. Mm-hmm. So even having somebody else that has been there and understands, even just to actually listen, it sounds like that would be such a huge thing. And to be able to help you think clearly when, you can't think clearly. You're in reaction mode during that time. And I mean, I look back and it's funny. My husband and I have these conversations that there's a lot of things we can't even remember. Like we can't even it's like, I have no idea what went on.
Right,
somebody I don't even know. It's like that section of my brain is gone.
Well, it's this whole other person that we have to, it's this extension of ourselves. And it's sometimes hard to keep track of those moments. And I want to help parents get past that feeling of, utter exhaustion and I don't know where to turn. I still remember my son wasn't diagnosed until he was 6. And I was fortunate yet unfortunate is that he also has cerebral palsy. And he's very ambulatory. He has a little bit of a limp, but nobody would even look at any other diagnosis thinking that it was part of the cerebral palsy and he'll grow out of it. And he was a preemie, so he'll grow out of it. And so people just kept putting us off. And, all the time I have, people are like, you need to make him mind, you're not doing it right. And, and I'm feeling like a complete failure for 6 years.
Yeah.
And I don't want anybody else to go through that.
No, it's, I mean, kind of maybe choke back tears a little bit because like I said, people well-meaning, they try to, some of them are not well-meaning, I'll take that back. But some of them are well-meaning, try to give you advice on how to help. And, there was some low times. And I know I've told this story before on the podcast, but I'm going to tell it again so people that have heard it, sorry, but here I go. I can remember one of the lowest points that I had was I had Cade and I had just given birth to Cole. Cole was a surprise baby. It was not a planned thing. When I found out I was pregnant, it was not a happy occasion at first. I love him. I'm glad he's here now, but my life was full and I was like, you've got to be kidding me, type of thing. So when he came along, I was nursing. I was so sick with him and I was at my lowest. Cade he was so hard during that time, and it was right before he was diagnosed. And I remember I had to take him to an appointment for, again, trying to figure out all the whys and the whats of what was going on with him. And we had about an hour drive at a stop at the store on the way home. Of course, Cade's already had enough. We'd been to the doctor. The baby's screaming. I'm nursing, so the entire front of my shirt is soaking wet. I look homeless anyway because I'm exhausted. And I'm just standing there in line to try to get a couple of things. Cade's throwing himself on the floor, and I'm trying to hold him with a baby screaming. I was overwhelmed, right? Like this close to breaking. Yeah. And somebody walked up to me, and they said, this is exactly what is wrong with the world today is people do not discipline their kid. You need to bust his ass. He's old enough to know better. And I just lost it. I started bawling. I left everything there, took the kids out to the van, and I had to fight Cade in his car seat. It always looked like child abuse when I was putting him in his car seat.
Right,
He didn't want to go. Fight him in his
don't want to go.
Stick the baby in the car, still screaming. And I just broke down because, and I think that's one of those things, like, you see these things all the time. I think I shared one today that you never know what people are going through. Like you have no idea what people's lives are. And that thing that you are saying that's completely rude might be that thing that just pushes them over the edge, and it's, I would have loved to have had somebody to call, be like, Tammi, I am like having a bad day. Because I didn't have anybody to call that understood.
Yeah. I felt that exact same way because 26 years ago, autism was not as prevalent as it was. Trey was only the second child in our district to ever go through with autism. And so we felt like we were pushing the waves, it was like pushing sand because we'd make a little bit of headroom and it would feel like everything keeps coming back. You you got to have a support system. And that's one of the big things that I want to be able to provide.
That's awesome. And I think that's the beauty of entrepreneurship is entrepreneurs in general have a knack for seeing a problem and offering that solution. And I love it when it's something that's not only helping somebody's business or whatever the things, which is great too, but somebody like you could actually help change somebody's life. You could, I mean, not to sound dramatic here, but you could save somebody's marriage. You can, because it is so hard, and when you have, I mean, me and my husband, we were at each other's throat all the time because we're exhausted and neither of us knew what to do. And I mean, it's hard on marriages. It's hard on, the relationships with other kids. It's hard when you're navigating those waters, and having that support system can make all the difference in the world because, it's something I think that's not talked about enough. Nobody ever said to me, like, they told me, I need to go to cognitive therapy. I need to go to occupational therapy. I need to, I checked all those boxes. Yeah. But nobody ever said, hey, mom, you really need an advocate. You need a support system. You need somebody on your side to be able to kind of walk you through this stuff. And that, I think, would have been a big game changer early on in my life.
I hope that I can help more people with that. And I don't know how else to get the word out, but I want to be able to help. And I just don't want anybody to have to be to the point that they can't know what to do next. And I'm not a therapist. I don't have any professional training in that. I'm not a marriage counselor by any means. I think I got lucky in the spouse department is when I was totally done, he could take over. And then when he was totally done, I could take over. It was a tag team. And he did. He was a very big part of helping us develop our tips and tools and what we gave to the teachers. And he's very good at that cause and effect. Try this, try that, try this, this worked, this didn't. He was absolutely great with that.
I think that's amazing. And I think there's nothing wrong with obviously therapists and marriage counselors and all those things. They have their time and place, but the fact that you've kind of been there, done that in that world, I think kind of gives you that vision to be able to help them navigate through, especially those early diagnosed years, because that's, for me, that was the hardest. It's like, I don't even know what to do. Like pre-diagnosis and right after diagnosis, it was kind of like, I don't even know, what to do. So, I mean, I think that would be a definite time where somebody that's kind of going through that would benefit from having, an advocate on their side. I love the term advocate anyway. It's kind of like, I need a cheerleader. I need somebody to vent to. I need somebody actually, yeah, exactly. And even sometimes somebody to say, it's not that bad. You will be okay. To call me out if I'm being dramatic, to be like, no, it's not that bad. You're going to be fine. Somebody to kind of, to be there, so I think that's amazing. A lot of people need that stuff.
I think sometimes you just need somebody who's been there, done that, and can understand. Like and I'm all for, let's have a pity party for a short while. I need a pity party for a little while.
Yeah.
And then I can pick myself up and figure out, okay, what's the next step?
Absolutely.
So I don't think anybody should discount those feelings.
No.
You need to have those feelings. And specifically with this diagnosis, I mean, there's certainly terminal diagnoses are totally different, but it's this to most of us moms and my husband, I was surprised at the level and depth of disappointment he felt in getting the diagnosis. So we need to take those feelings and understand they're real and don't discount them. Yeah. Understand it, live with that feeling, because until you do, you can't move on to the next level. And so let's let those feelings out, and then we'll figure out what to do next.
I love that. I think that's perfect because, I agree with you 100%. You definitely need to feel your feelings. What your feelings are valid. But I think a lot of times, and I've been that person before too, where I kind of get caught up in like, well, there's no point in anything anymore. I give up. I quit. The drama side comes out. And at that point, I need somebody to be like, no, you're all right. You're
like, I get it. I get it. Yeah. Just don't tell me, calm down, because that's the worst. Oh, no. Don't tell me to calm down, because
my husband's tried that a few times. only a few, because he's learned pretty quick on that one. That's not a good thing to say to Maria. So yeah, it's funny. No, I mean, I think that this is great. And where's the best place for somebody to reach out to you? And I know I'm gonna get all the links. So anybody that's going to be listening to this, if you're listening right now on any of the podcast platforms, we will have a link to all of Tammi's stuff in the show notes. But for anybody that's watching right now and they want to try to find out more about what you're doing, where's the best place for them to do that?
It'd probably be my website, and it's Saving Our Tomorrows. And I chose that because I want to make tomorrow better than today. So that's how I remember Saving Our Tomorrows.
Saving Our Tomorrows. That's perfect.
And there's different links. It gets you to what my course is. It gets you to the books. There's some different resources, civil and, some civil links. I don't by any means have an exhaustive list and can say I have every state and county's autism, but I have some general ones that you can take a look at. Some of it's disability rights, a lot about the IEP and, what it means to have a formal education and what they're required to do, and some of those different links.
That's awesome. I love that. All right. Well, I'll make sure that information is in the show notes. And I thank you so much for being on today. It's been a blast. I feel like I could just talk to you forever.
This has been really, really nice to talk to another autism parent too, who's been there, done that. So I'm very happy to have had the time with you as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And for everybody that's watching right now, we will be live again next Thursday at 2 p.m. No, we will not. I lied. Next Thursday is Thanksgiving. So we will not be live. We will not be live next Thursday. I don't know when we go live again. Just check the calendar. So I'm glad I caught myself that. People will be on there next Thursday. They'll be, wait. No, they wouldn't. They'd be eating turkey. I'll be eating turkey.
They'd be busy eating all too many appetizers and not being ready for dinner.
Yeah, exactly. I do it while cooking. I'm cooking and eating, and by dinner I'm not eating. And my kids are like, why are you not eating? I'm like, because I've been cooking for like 8 hours at this point, eating the whole time.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Tammi. And you have a very happy Thanksgiving and a holiday season. And we'll be in touch soon. I'd like to find out a little bit more about your books and get those. I love reading anyway. So we'll be in touch. Thanks so much.
Sounds great. Thanks, Maria. Right. Bye-bye. Bye.